Righty chaps, today being for a real fun one as we are going to fly off to Mars. We're going to make a case for Mars, so let's strap ourselves right in. Now this doesn't require much of a context, but I'll give you some anyways. When you take an expanded view of our species and of this planet, across space, across time, across dimensions of intelligence and consciousness, we realize that we are a very precious species. And this is a very precious planet. This is precious cargo we are carrying on this planet. Because we're the only species, we're the only planet that we know of that contains life, and that contains life that can look at the universe, that can talk back to the universe, that can admire the universe. Not in its fullest, it's going to be a part to get to that point where we can appreciate the immensity, the absolute majesty of the universe in all of its glory. But again, every single second that we've been on this journey has taken us closer and closer to an ever greater appreciation of our own luck more than anything else. The fact that we came despite all the odds, and the fact that we established this civilization as there's on the verge of becoming spacefaring, there's on the verge of creating this digital god that can help us create these technologies that can help us solve debt, that can help us build the best lives, build the best lives, build the best societies, solve all of our problems, create this transhumanist utopia. These are things that we ought not to take for granted. How might we take these for granted? We could take these for granted by assuming that things are going to continue the way they have, as in our planet has protected us from forces that might try to undo us, and it's going to continue to do that. That is a very dangerous position to take. At any point in time, something could happen. That could come from outside of our atmosphere, or something could happen on this planet that could wipe out our species and all the other species. The absolute scope of this tragedy, of this travesty, is something that I simply cannot conceive of, because if humans don't exist in this universe doesn't have anything to appreciate it. And this universe doesn't need anything, but from our perspective, the beauty of this universe, the majesty, the glory of it, all of it comes from the eyes of the beholder. That's the human species, that's our consciousness. If we take that away, the universe becomes cold and empty and worthless in all the ways that matters to us, and all the ways that could really matter even from the, I don't want to anthropomorphize the universe, but that could matter from the universe's perspective, because the greatest invention, the greatest creation of this universe is life, is consciousness. And so if the universe loses that, and if we are the only conscious species on this in this universe, then that'd be the greatest possible loss. It terrifies me even to consider that as a possibility, and so we ought to do our very utmost to ensure that doesn't happen. Another perspective on this is that when we take a less expanded view, we realize that, or we sense, we have a complacency. Things are great. We build this really great civilization. We are having fun. We are doing all the things that we ought to. Or we are getting to those points, and we might feel this desire to rest on our laurels. Just stop expanding or stop exploring and stop thinking about going deep into the cosmos. And that reminds me of one of my favorite poems, which is, "The woods, they're lovely, but I've got miles to go before I sleep." And my version of this for this particular conversation is that the woods, or our current situation, it sure is lovely. It's dark and it's deep, and we could sit in our current moment for the rest of eternity. But we've got promises to keep. These promises are to ourselves, but we also owe it to our future, to our progenies and their progenies, and to the trillions of future humans who deserve the most blessed of existence. And they deserve it just because we want our kids to deserve that. Again, to the kids of our, again, you're not capable of thinking that far down the line, and for example, like 100 generations later, in the year 10,000, in the year 100,000 beats 80, right? But once we take those expanded views, realize that there's so much life left in this universe, on our planet, in our species, and we should do everything possible to improve the scope of life, improve the scope of consciousness, enhance every single thing that we can, and enhance the possibility of us being able to do that, which is the very basic thing, survival. And those are two main frames that I'm going to use to talk about this. One is the survival frame, but the more important frame is the expansion, the enhancement frame of everything that we care about and everything we might care about in the future that we've got no way of knowing that this is something that we'll get to care about, so this is something we'll want to care about. We also partly owe it to our ancestors who have survived the worst odds, the most dangerous times and climes, and have gone us to this point in time, this point that could become a launch pad for our leap into the cosmos. We owe it to them for all sorts of reasons, but we also owe it to them because we can now do things that they could never have conceived of. They could have never imagined us doing the things that we are doing right now and the things that we'll be doing in the near future and in the far future for that matter. So, after that long and winding introduction, the question is, why should we go to Mars? What is the rationale? Why should we go to space? Why should we think about space exploration and utilization? Multiple answers. We can talk about these reasons ad infinitum, but I want to focus on the ones which are core to me and my motivations and my understanding of the species, of this, of the desire that we have, this gene that we have that wants to plant our flag. And that's where I want to start first. When George Mallory he was asked, why do you want to climb Everest? He gave a response which has now become iconic. I want to climb it because it's there. Yeah, and so many people use that phrase flippantly when they're climbing Everest. And there's a truth to it. The truth reveals something very deep about us. We are this very inquisitive species. We want to explore. We want to go around to all the places that we can, even if these places might not have any practical benefits. For example, if you remove you might argue that climbing Everest brings along the emotional benefits and practical benefits, but if you don't include that in that category, then there's no benefit to climbing Everest. You're just taking a risk for something which is just going to be a memory and which is going to be a release of emotions, right? But again, you could argue that everything we do is about putting ourselves in a certain state of being, with exploration, with wanting to plant a flag across the cosmos, starting with Mars. Again, that's so innate to our species, to this explorative gene, this curiosity gene in us, that we owe it. Just because it's there, we ought to do it. Just because it's a challenge. So that's the very trivial reason why we ought to do it. Moving from the trivial to the practical, we can, again, I already alluded to this, but when we think of all the things that could wipe us out, nuclear wars, biologically engineered, artificially engineered pandemics, super intelligence takeover, or AI going rogue, bad actor wanting to destroy the entire planet and having the levers of AI and robotics to be able to do his or her dirty deed, or something from the outside, right? A pulsar beam, or an asteroid, or a solar flare which hits us, just for which we just happen to be in the most unfortunate position in space, right? All sorts of things could wipe us out. We ought to do everything that we can to create backups around this planet and then beyond it, right? In the first place, the natural place for that backup is Mars. Eventually, we'll be building O-rings, we'll be building other structures in space, we'll be colonizing other planets, we'll be terraforming other planets. But Mars is the most natural starting point. And again, why do we want to have a backup? Again, I'll repeat the same thing I said, which is that human consciousness and this planet, all the life on this planet for that matter, this is so precious. We don't understand just how precious this is. The universe is vast. Billions, hundreds of billions of stars. Galaxies, trillions of stars in this universe. And we've not seen any scope of intelligence or life. We could very well be if the Fermi filters are, again, we'll never know that. We can never know that particular set of numbers. But if those are not kind for life to exist on this universe, then we might very well be the only species on this, in this universe. And we cannot afford to make that most fatal mistake of allowing ourselves to become complacent and, allow something stupid to take us off. When we know, for the first time in our planet's history, we know the perils and we also know how precious this cargo is and the potential of this cargo, right? Up until the 15th century, people used to just care about survival, 16th, 17th, right? over the last 200 years, we started appreciating the finer pleasures of life. We started appreciating, well, the very fact of existence, right? Again, I'm not saying that people in the past, they didn't have gratitude, they didn't have the sense, the consciousness of, just the very beauty of being alive. All of that's been a very fundamental part of the human experience for the longest time, I'm sure. But we never had the technology and the wherewithal to be able to do things about it. And this time we do. So we ought to use it in the way, in the best ways possible. Going to Mars, going to creating O-ring structures, etc., also allows us to create new structures, economic structures, create new institutions, new legal systems, new ideas around how to build society, how to organize resources, how to do the things that we've been doing on this planet with its constraints, its limitations, its even the human things like religion, right? Religion has influenced so much of our society's evolution in so many different ways. Like when we go to Mars, the people who are going to go to Mars and colonize Mars, those are going to be free thinking people. Those are going to be like the Americans, except America still existed, the early pioneers, they still existed in that particular fabric. But once you remove those early explorers, once you increase the distance from, 3,000 miles between the colonizers and the colonized, once you increase that distance to millions of miles, then you're talking of substantially, radically different systems. So we're going to have a lot of experimentation. We're going to be able to fast forward our progress to getting to the most optimal systems. Or, there might be multiple optimal systems depending on what we want to. But again, we'll be able to start. We'll be able to actually have these experiments. We'll be able to have these new systems. And that creates for a lot of fun, a lot of excitement in terms. It creates a lot of fertile ground for being able to, well, create societies from scratch. And lots of people are going to have a ton of fun, just like the founding fathers had a ton of fun building a society which, despite all of its flaws, is one of the great examples, one of the great emblems on this planet. So we'll be able to do that multiplied 1,000. Also, when we think of young children, we think of teenagers, there's this pervasive sense of doom and gloom for many because of climate anxiety, because of fears about AI taking over the jobs, because of these shifting sands of culture, all of these different things. A lot of young people are not hopeful, which is really paradoxical when you think about the fact that they've got the greatest reasons to be hopeful. Of all the generations past, they should be the generation that should be full of the greatest amounts of hope, but that is not true. And again, a lot of cultural memes play into this, a lot of the cultural dynamics play into this. But this actually starting a new golden age of space exploration and utilization and colonization. This could inspire young minds, young ones to learn about space, learn about how to do things. We could inspire millions of young people to take up things that they otherwise wouldn't have considered as a career path. For example, space settling technician, right? Mars settling technician, right? There'll be millions of these roles, and they can start looking up again, looking up with hope, with a twinkle in their eye, with inspiration in their hearts, with courage in their souls. And this, again, to use that same metaphor, this could be like the American frontier expansion for this generation, multiplied by 1,000,000, with more promise, with more potential, and equally importantly, done more ethically, because there wouldn't be any species, there wouldn't be any life that would suffer when we do take on our mantle of space exploration and utilization. When we think of the constraints, the bottlenecks to economic progress, to our GDPs, labor is one of the big ones, but the biggest one that we don't really look at as the biggest one, because it seems to be a fixed variable in many of these discussions, is natural resources, right? Because there's only so much oil that you can get off the lands. There's only so many natural resources that you can get. There's only so much water you can use. There's only so much energy that you can use. Once we go to space, we're talking of functionally infinite energy. We're talking of being able to mine asteroids and get all the resources, all the raw materials, everything that we need without, again, harming any ecosystems. We're talking of removing the natural resource bottleneck completely. And we're obviously talking of inventing new technologies. You're talking of creating new markets, new opportunities, new business models. The boom, the explosion in our economies, in our GDPs, would be so much greater, even compared to the boom brought in by AGI, or even super intelligent systems. Because, again, even AGI systems, ASI systems, one of their big bottlenecks, their greatest bottlenecks would still be natural resources because we live in a physically constrained world. So if we can reduce that to the degree that we can, and we will be, and you're talking of the kind of our GDPs, again, I don't want to give any numbers because I've not thought about numbers, but our GDPs could be 100x of what it is at this moment within a span of 50 years. It could be much more than that. Right? These are things that are simply inconceivable. We're talking of abundance for everyone. We're talking of a transhumanist utopia in the real sense. This also happens to be the best moment in time to embark on this for a multitude of reasons. One is that space travel has become cheaper, reusable rockets, a lot of interest in space companies, water industries, lots of really inspiring founders, really smart people, technical people, building lots of great companies to reduce the cost of space travel. Jeff Bezos, again, he's got that vision. We're going to touch upon him in another point later. But Elon Musk, he obviously was the one who kind of kickstarted this, or restarted this. So, yeah, with this amount of interest, with this amount of money being flown in, and more importantly, with the amount of progress we are making in AI and robotics, we are going to get to the point where we are going to be able to reduce the human risk, right? Because pace is scary. Like the amount of things that can go wrong, and you just need the tiniest thing to go wrong in the tiniest way possible for things to just explode, literally, right? So we cannot afford any half measures in space. But thankfully, in many cases, we won't need to rely on humans. We won't have to subject humans to situations where the risk tolerance, the risk factors are above the threshold, above the acceptable thresholds, right? So we'll be able to use these powerful AI systems, these powerful robots to do our bidding. Again, this was not possible even a few years back. This is only going to become possible because of the amount of progress we have made in AGI and robotics in the very recent past. There's some arguments, for example, why do people go to Antarctica, right? People love to travel, people love to explore new environments. Space tourism, it's going to be a big one for consumers. For the other things I mentioned, they're more abstract, or they're more, it'll be industrialists, it'll be business people who will be more concerned with that. But for consumers, or just for your average citizen, for your average Jane and Joe, they probably would care more about what do I get from space, right? Apart from all the technological advancements that'll make their lives 100 times better within the course of a few years, the direct benefits are going to be that they'll be able to have these novel experiences, space tourism, space entertainment, these novel experiences that have never been possible for our species. Sure, for the first maybe couple of decades, it's only going to be affordable to the super rich, to the multimillionaires. But with every single technology that has come and gone in the past, the price drops substantially, exponentially over the course of once you start getting enough people. And again, going back to my point, right? Like space is going to make everything cheaper. We're going to have an abundant society. So you could imagine that in the year 2080, you could travel to the edge of space, or you could travel to the moon for that matter, for a 1 week stay, for the equivalent of $1,000 today, right? I can very easily imagine that by doing some pretty simple back of the envelope calculations. Now, I'll give you some numbers that I'd use. Again, I don't have those exact numbers, but I just did these calculations quickly in my mind. So the rate at which space cost is dropping, right, in terms of how much does it cost to take 1 kg of mass from ground level to the edge of space, that's been dropping exponentially. Then we look at the fact that we're going to invent new materials, we are going to have millions, not millions, but hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of spacecrafts. Just like we've got millions of cars, we're going to have millions of spacecrafts. You're going to have, entire infrastructures catering to that, right? All of this is going to drive down costs to a fraction, a very tiny fraction of how much it costs to go to space today, which is in the millions. Probably 10 million for a ticket to go to the edge of space, somewhere in that ballpark. And again, we might not even have monetary systems in the year 2100. So, yeah, this is going to become accessible to almost everyone who would want to do it. It's going to become super safe. It's going to be safer than traveling in an airplane. It's going to be safer than, well, even going on a walk in your typical city. So this is going to, again, be something that's just going to be super exciting for the average Joe and Jane. A couple of things which are going to come from this is that there's this overview effect that astronauts have described as this transformation in their mindset, in their relationship with Earth, and their appreciation of what this planet is and the value it holds, right? Because again, we take this planet, we take all of the life, we take humans for granted. But once you take an overview of this planet from 100 miles out, a couple of 100 miles out, 3,000 miles out from space, and once you look at this planet as this tiny planet, once you, for example, if you're someone from the UK, you look at this country, tiny country, really tiny, and then you grasp that all the people I love, most of the people I love, they are living in this tiny country, and you see that there's the deserts which have taken over that used to be forests. You start admiring, you start appreciating, and you start understanding the delicate balances, the delicate ecosystems. You start seeing the damage. You know that in the 1970s, Borneo was full of these forests, and now it's full of palm oil, right? You notice these things, and you realize just how delicate things are, and just how fast destruction can happen, environmental degradation can happen. You realize that there are no borders between France and Germany. You realize that there are no borders between India and Pakistan. You see all of these different things, and I haven't experienced that. Obviously, I have not gone to space, but I can kind of put myself, again, to a very limited degree, I can put myself in that state of what it might mean, what it might change in me, what it might have, what it might create in me to witness that, right? That we are this one species, we are in this battle against entropy. We are in this battle to maximize life, to maximize consciousness, to maximize, yeah. And so people start having the appreciation. That would be an understated effect that I think everyone deserves to have and should have. Because the more people, so again, I'm not going to talk about that at length, but one of my missions in life is to restore biodiversity and to have this land become a haven for wildlife, right? But most people don't care about it. Now, I imagine that for a lot of the people who don't care about it, if they're taken to space and they see, that our planet was teeming with life just a few centuries back, right? And we destroyed these ecosystems. And all of these, for example, America, right? Like there are these entire states, massive countryside states that have become just, farmlands, just crops, just corn being grown on land that was home to millions of bisons and all sorts of other megafauna and flora, right? And you realize that we've destroyed so much. We owe it to our planet to restore it to that state, that glorious state. So I hope that evokes those kinds of emotions. Again, going from the abstract to something, or rather something more practical to something more abstract, coming from the top of from space down to Earth. I think the effects of this, in terms of our planet's trajectory, we want to be on a Kardashev scale 2 civilization. We want to accelerate our scale of progress, our scope of progress. We want to, move on to the next step in our evolution, right? For in the first phase of human evolution, we were tribes. We were almost living like chimp-like lives. We were just smarter, so we were able to do the chimp-like things in a smarter way. But if you look at humans from the year maybe 500,000 or a million, when Homo sapiens became Homo sapiens, I just want to focus on Homo sapiens. I'm sure that there are no hard stops, hard lines, which even for behaviors, not just for species. But Homo sapiens from the year 500,000 to the year before the invention of writing, before the invention of those kinds of things, the wheel, for example, right? We were living in these very chimp-like, we probably were living in these very chimp-like modes. We would hunt, we would kill, and then we would bring these foods. We would just make something very rudimentary. We didn't have spices, we didn't have rich palates, we didn't have expectations or desires, right? Because everything was just, all you cared about was, because biologically, even though our minds probably were would have been a lot more complex. Your environment would have constrained the ways in which the complexity of your mind would might have expressed itself. So you wouldn't have thought about, oh, how boring is my food, right? I'm just eating the same boring old food. Or you wouldn't have thought about, oh, how boring is my life? Like, there are no interesting stories. I'm sure that they had their own very limited, very basic versions of stories that they might have shared with each other, but lives are very limited, very chimp-like. If you if you compare chimp existence to human existence, like from afar, you would have seen a lot of parallels, right? And then we start inventing, well, we enter the age of agriculture from 10,000 BC, and that radically changes. That brings us very close to our modern conception of Homo sapiens, the wise men, where we start doing things which actually require us to use our brains, right? So we start problem solving, we start learning about cycles, food cycles, how to grow crops, how to maintain crops, how to build dwellings, long-term dwellings, right? We start how to protect our dwellings against invaders, how to attack invaders, how to build weapons, right? So we start actually using our brains, and so lives become more complex. Human essence becomes more complex, and then we enter the age of, oh, so we start building greater and greater stuff. 5000 BC, we build pyramids, we build hanging gardens, Babylon, we build all sorts of crazy stuff that still shocks us to this day. Like, one of the shocking statistics is that we are closer to Cleopatra compared to how close Cleopatra is to the pyramids of Giza. I mean, that is just astonishing, right? But anyway, so we start doing more and more complex things, and then we take another step change with the printing press, right? That's another significant step in our evolution. Well, before then, obviously, Christianity, these ideals, I think that was the next step change. And then after that, the big step change was the invention of, well, the printing press. And then the invention of the steam engine, which kickstarts this industrial revolution, which is, again, a significant step change. And then the invention of computers, and then the invention of AI, right? And the next step change is going to be us utilizing space, colonizing space. That's just going to open up all sorts of avenues of growth, of development, of progress, of understanding, of knowledge, of expansion, all sorts of things that we care about. It also happens to be the case that a lot of the things that we care about solving in this very moment, like climate change, overpopulation, biodiversity destruction, ecosystem destruction, heavy industries, polluting the planet, not just killing other species and destroying the habitats, but actively polluting people and killing people. In, for example, lots of cities in India, people are dying because of the industries, right? So we see these examples, and solution lies up there. Solution lies in opening up space so that more people can go to space, so that we can relieve some pressure on this planet, because this planet doesn't need to carry 8 billion people. That probably is way too many, but we also don't need to have less people. We want to have more people. More people means more consciousness, more life, right? Humans are a good thing. Humans are the best thing in the universe. Not just the people that we know, that's a selfish attitude, but humans simply, apart from, those rotten apples that we have, like the Hitlers and the Genghis Khans, humans are the ultimate good. Consciousness is the ultimate good, and we want to have more of it. Like that's something that we all need to agree to. Like, that's very basic. Like, that's probably the most basic thing that we need to agree to. And so a lot of the problems are connected to that particular fact, that we need to relieve pressure on this planet, because, again, it's not just about the planet, but having a ton of people within your vicinity, it's also not good for you psychologically. Like, there's an optimal level of density, and different cultures have got a different sense of what the optimality is for that culture. But I can't imagine, packing, even if we had the best lives, I can't imagine packing, like, I don't know, 10,000 people in a super futuristic building block as being optimal. It might be, we never know. It doesn't seem to me to be the case at this point. Some other problems which are kind of lower level problems are commute times, right? Like, we love to travel, not just commute rather, but just travel times, right? We love to travel, we love to do things, but it takes 8 hours to go from London to NYC. It takes 12, no, 18 hours to go from London to Sydney, right? People want to do stuff, but this is a significant limitation. And so once we kickstart this process, once we start spending more and more time and attention and intelligence units on the problem of making space more streamlined, we're obviously going to build better, faster methods of transportation. And so you can imagine a future. This is just one example of all the different applications, or rather benefits, that we could accrue from kickstarting this process. But one which is very, I think, pertinent for many people is travel, right? People love travel, but it's very limiting in a real sense, and that you spend a lot of time traveling. If you, yeah, like that time constraints, like if you want to travel this distance, you'll have to spend this amount of time, right? But imagine in the year 2050, for $100, you can on board a new kind of spacecraft which goes above the Earth's atmosphere, and it takes you. So you wake up in Tokyo, and you wanna go to a gallery exhibition in Paris. You reach that in 20 minutes, and then you wanna go to New York for a few meetings. You do that, and again you have your commute be 20 minutes, and then you wanna spend the evening partying, admiring the sunset and partying in Sydney, and you reach that place in 35 minutes, right? That's going to be a very possible, very probable future. And it's probably going to happen within the next 30 years. Because again, progress is going to be exponential. There is this conversation I hear a lot in these circles where people talk about colonizing space, utilizing extraction resources from space, talking about how space is pristine, we need to preserve it, we've destroyed this planet, but at least we don't want to repeat that mistake with space. I found that to be the most ludicrous, the stupidest argument anyone can make, right? The stupidest thing anyone can say. It just shows to me that you're very undereducated, and in the sense that if anyone knows anything about space, the first thing they would know is that space is vast. The sheer number of planets, exoplanets that we know of, and again, most of our models tell us, most of our most compelling models tell us that probably every star system is going to have some planets. So we are not an exception. We used to believe that, planetary formation is a very rare thing. We don't believe that to be the case anymore. And we know for a fact that there are billions of stars. Just in our galaxy alone, there are 200 billion stars. So even if we conservatively estimate that every star has 5 planetary systems, 5 planets orbiting it, we are talking of a lot of real estate. You're talking of a trillion planets in our solar system, or in our galaxy. If you just look at our galactic neighborhood, we are still talking of millions of planets, right? Now, millions, again, that most people don't really understand how big a million is. Imagine a million Earths, right? So space is vast. Space is vast. Another fact about space, most of space is pretty uninteresting. Pretty damn uninteresting. Pretty damn boring. And we've seen pictures from Discovery, from Curiosity, right? We've seen pictures from the moon. The moon, most of the moon is damn boring. Now, there are parts that we haven't clicked pictures of, but there's no part of the moon which seems to me worth preserving in the conventional sense. In the sense that, for example, we want to preserve the Yosemite, we want to preserve the Himalayas, we want to preserve the Uluru, the Ayers Rocks, we want to preserve the Kilimanjaro, we want to preserve the Grand Canyon, we want to preserve the Great Barrier Reef, we want to preserve the rivers, right? We want to preserve these geological features. With space, for the most part, space is empty, not just empty and dead in the sense of no life, it's also empty and dead in the sense of weather, climatic systems. And climatic systems, not that obviously lots of planets do have, without life, they do have climatic systems, but there are lots of planets, most planets probably don't have these systems that would etch these absolutely majestic, gorgeous, and ravines and valleys onto their skins, right? Onto their beings. So we don't need to worry about scarring them the way we need to, and the way we should actually worry about. Like the only planet that we actually need to have, well, no, exceptions with sand, right? Like the places in our solar system that we know, for example, I read about, how the view from Titan, looking at the Jupiter, if we do ever set up a colony on Titan, that would be one of the most magical views on this entire solar system. Mars, obviously Olympus Mons, we want to preserve it. There are obviously features on Mars that we want to preserve. For the most part, most of space is, but it's also very similar to, yeah, to each other. So we don't need to worry about that as a consideration. We also ought to do it for the expansion and the dramatic step change that this could elicit in our consciousness as we become a multiplanetary species, not just in our species consciousness, collective consciousness, which feeds all sorts of downstream things, but our individual consciousness, right? Like you'd have, again, this is connected to the OU effect, but once you become spacefaring, and once you become multiplanetary, which is a distinct thing from, just observing this planet, again, for this thing, I cannot even imagine what might be some of those thoughts, some of those emotions, but it would have to be something that needs to be experienced to be described, and it would be something that we actually want to experience, and we would want people to experience. Now, for me, I wouldn't want to rank all of these reasons. Some of them are more compelling, some of them are top of the list. That okay, these are the reasons that drive me the most. I'm going to get into space as soon as I have the capital resources to be able to. I've got lots of really interesting ideas, but this requires like hundreds of millions of dollars tens of millions of dollars to make any meaningful dent. So I'll get to that point hopefully soon, but I've got strong motivations to do that, to do this, not just at an abstract level that I'm a part of the species. I want to actually be a part of this process in pushing us forward, right? But I don't really have a hierarchy. I do have like the bands, and in the top band, obviously the expansion of consciousness, the backup, those are things. But also, equally important to me is the conservation of our fellow species on this planet, expanding into space, setting up extraction units on asteroids rather than on our planet, setting up bases for living. So for me, one of the things that I care the most about is nature. For many people, that's the same, because we come from nature. We are nature. Again, enlightenment was the precursor to this. There were some ideas which separated us from nature, and obviously we are distinct in many ways. But when we create that kind of artificial separation, we lose the connection that we have to nature, and we lose a sense of responsibility that we have to nature. Now that we actually can take care of it and preserve it and nurture it and help it flourish in its own way. And so for me, one of the biggest unlocks that space is going to allow, space exploration and utilization is going to allow, is that we can finally help nature flourish, biodiversity be restored and be flourished on the planet. Allow it to and actually help it to thrive, this planet. Because when you look at all of the things that we get out of, all of the things that we want out of life, all of the material things, there's always a cost to nature, and these are not really considered as part of because no business, and our economic system doesn't really give a damn about it. But there's always a cost to nature. For example, palm oil, that is one of the biggest ingredients in some of the most popular foodstuffs, right? Biscuits, cereals, etc. Now we have cut down millions of acres of pristine rainforests in the Southeast Asian archipelagos due to our hunger for this cheap material, right? This cheap resource. The cost, for example, the bonobos, they're an iconic species, they're very intelligent. But think about all the species that we don't know that have been rendered extinct or who lost their homes because of this, right? I call it a tragedy. Thankfully, we'll very soon be in a position where we don't have to compromise our hunger for technological advancement. We won't have to feel guilty about wanting the very best. For the first time in our civilization's history, in our species' history, we'll be able to increase our quality of life and exponentially increase our technology, our prowess in technology without it having any adverse effects on nature. There's a completely new paradigm that helps us transcend something that a lot of people feel a strong sense of guilt about, and I do, very much so. It's kind of irrational because I didn't have anything to do with what my ancestors said, but well, here we go. I kind of don't actually. Like, there's a sense that that thing exists, but it doesn't. That I guess I'll just have to untangle my emotions about how I feel about my ancestors having killed off so many animal species. That's for another time. But this is where the Bezos vision comes in, which is one of the most inspiring visions I've heard from any tech people. Any of the people in the tech industry, most of the people, a lot of people do have inspiring visions for the future, don't get me wrong. But he's got this particular strand, this particular idea around how, once we have O-rings, once we move heavy industries away from Earth, we'll be able to have this as a safe haven for all of the other species that we've shared with this planet with, right? And I just find that to be the best thing possible for us and for them, right? Because again, we are custodians and we should be good stewards of all the life that has existed with us. As for those who might feel a sense of compunction about feeling a sense, feeling a sense of guilt, feeling a sense of remorse about us utilizing and exploiting space, exploiting Mars, exploiting other planets, let me just assure you that there are two options. Because we are thirsty, we are hungry, we'll devour anything and everything in our hunger for have improving our quality of life. The two options in front of you are that we destroy or use our planet's resources. We use the resources of a space that is a billion times, or billions of times greater, more expansive. It's empty, so you're not really exploiting anything. Because to exploit something requires you to have a subject which is being exploited. In this case, space is empty. You're not, when you exploit Mars, you're just using something that no one else would have. Right, in any case. So, yeah, those are no real concerns to me. Like, exploiting space. Not only is it much more preferable, but you're not actually exploiting because it's just so vast, going back to referring you to my earlier point. So even if you don't care about all of the other reasons, if you don't care about humans, if all you care about is nature, and there are a few people like that, or you might care about humans, but you don't care about technological progress, you don't care about all of the other things I mentioned, this should still be the clincher. And this is a big one. This is a real big one, because I cannot overstate just how significant this paradigm shift will be, where we can continue to increase the quality of life without having any detrimental effect on our ecosystems. So, yeah. This has already gone way longer than I wanted to. Like, this should have been 25 minutes, and there are loads of things that we could talk about, but I guess I'll keep them for the adjoining essay that I'll go to, this video essay. So some of the other things I want to talk about that could have talked about as the benefits, as the adding to the case for why we ought to go to space and inhabit space. It would give us a new sense of meaning, a new sense of purpose that a lot of people are missing for us as a species and for humankind. There would be international cooperation, right? There will be the lines between nations, many of the artificial lines will be blurred. There'll be shared goals and objectives. There'll be cross-cultural collaboration. There'll be a multitude, diversity of development paths that we can explore in the outer reaches of our planet, beyond the outer reaches of planets rather. We'll be able to, we'll create new species. We'll be able to actually create new life, and we'll be able to create life that has, again, I don't know how I feel about that. Again, haven't thought deeply about this, but we will be creating new human species that are more attuned to their own environments. We'll also be creating new species that have greater levels of intelligence and consciousness. I'm not talking of AI, I'm talking of actual biological species based on our genetic history. So it'll be fun. And again, that allows us to increase the prospect of life, of consciousness in the universe, which is, as I mentioned, as I hopefully have established, the greatest good there can be in this universe. There'll be a boom in space infrastructure development that'll have a multiplying effect on almost every facet of the economy and on every facet of life for that matter. It'll also make us compel us to invest in creating these systems and protocols to protect us from space-based threats. There'll be medical advances from space research. Will something might come from, a lot of things that might come from this might help us solve diseases and solve death. There'll be the establishment of space-based solar power, which is, if we don't figure out nuclear fusion, then that's going to be the most promising source of energy for us for the rest of the, well, until we figure out other sources, right? And the greatest thing about that, it's virtually limitless. Like, the only constraint is how much material you have to capture the energy, right? And eventually we'll probably convert an entire planet to create a dyson sphere. We could maybe Pluto, maybe Venus, I don't know. Not Venus, because we probably wouldn't want to keep it, but we'll get resources from the asteroid belt, we'll get some resources, just material, convert that into panels and envelop the entire sun into that, and increase our energy intake and consumption for that expenditure for that matter by tens and tens of orders of magnitude. Maybe not tens of orders of magnitude, but like 5, like million folds, maybe. Okay, I'll have to double check my math, but maybe, right? So yeah, I mean, the point stands. We don't have to get too caught into details. There'll be new business models, new businesses that'll flourish, they'll come up, they'll create new horizons for human achievement, will connect with the cosmic perspective, will learn to create and maintain artificial ecosystems, not just for humans, but we can eventually have these ecosystems, have these havens, safe havens be expanded from Earth beyond the Earth for all the different animal species, many of the animal species, for many of the flora and fauna. We could develop superior environmental technologies, and many of these, we could develop technologies and systems that could help Earth survive disasters. We could develop planetary scale geoengineering capabilities that can have significant impact in some pretty important areas, like fixing climate change, setting up climate control in the northern hemisphere to make land more habitable so that we can make more and more of Earth habitable. We could have better Earth observation and climate monitoring, which again connects to that one of the previous points. We could have new forms of again, I've touched upon this, new forms of governance and social organization and systems and institutions. We could have opportunities for social experimentation. We could have, yeah, I mean, we could have countless things, right? The benefits, you can write about these benefits for hours and hours, and you still wouldn't be exhausted. So yeah, lots of things that we could talk about. Is there any single reason why we ought not do it? There's not a single one. Like, even in the worst case scenario where, our timelines are, because we eventually are going to figure out most of these things, or you can almost take it for granted, right? If we survive as a species, if we don't do anything stupid, and if nothing unfortunate happens from outside, or even from the plant breaks apart, the core destabilizes, right, and all sorts of crazy things can happen that we might not have the models for. But yeah, if we are still functional in the year 2100, most of the things that we talked about, you're going to have them. We might be off regarding the timelines by a few decades, but even in the worst case scenario, and the worst case scenario are just timeline based, you're still going to reap so many benefits. So even in the worst case scenario, we still have a glorious future in front of us, a glorious future in space, and what that future in space implies for our future here on this planet, on this home base. So as for what that future looks like, obviously that's for another conversation. I'm writing an essay on that, so we'll talk about that soon. But yeah, I think this is it for the time being. Thanks so much for the time. Catch you soon. Take care.